In 2003, director Tim McCanley's and stars Robert Duvall and Michael Caine gave the world a heartwarming coming-of-age story that pulls no punches.
In 2022, we try our first sample of one of America's first finished whiskeys.
The film is Secondhand Lions.
The whiskey is Angel's Envy.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we're looking at the 2003 film Secondhand Lions, a movie that may have been mentioned more than any other film in the history of this podcast. Because
Bob,
if you're a listener, you know this might be Brad's favorite movie ever.
It's up there, man.
You love this movie, Brad.
Dude, I'm just going to start with the story of the first time I ever saw Secondhand Lions. I'm going to the theaters with my grandmother. Just her and I. We're going to see Secondhand Lions. Now, this was back in the day. I know I'm going to lose anybody who's under the age of like 25. But this was back in the day when you had a newspaper delivered to your house every week. And in that newspaper, Bob, I'm sure you'll remember, the local theaters would print movie times, right?
Sure.
And you got to look and see what day and what time movies were showing. Well, so it's Saturday morning. My grandma pulls out the paper, and it says that the movie starts at like 10:20. And so, it's 9:50, and we're driving on over. I'm yelling at my grandma for going like 42 and a 25. And we get to the movie theater, and the movie theater is locked. There's not a single car in the parking lot, and it is obviously that they printed the wrong time in the paper, right? It was probably 11:20. So my grandmother, who at this time is probably like, I don't know, 80, 82, proceeds to get out. We look in the front doors. It's obviously closed. And Bob, you've been to Cinemark in Valley View, correct? So why don't you inform the audience how big that movie theater is?
I mean, I think it's like 24, 26 screens. It's a massive multiplex.
I remember when it was built, it was like one of the 3 largest cinemas in the country. My grandma proceeded to walk around that entire building, checking every single door to try and get in so she could yell at somebody for the wrong time being printed. I don't know exactly what she was so angry about. But no joke, we walked around that entire building checking every single door to get into this theater that was so obviously closed.
All right, so then when did you see the movie?
So we stayed there for an hour until they opened up. And my grandma went in and she yelled at somebody, and some poor teenager had to listen to my 80-year-old grandma yell at them.
Bore the brunt of that.
Yeah.
That's great, man.
Hats off to them, man. But then we went in and we saw Secondhand Lions. And as like, it was 2003. So I was like 12 or 13 years old. And my grandma, it was me, my grandma, and maybe like 4 other people in this movie theater. And she was just laughing her butt off the entire film. Like almost every third line, she was just losing it. And I'm sitting there like dipping down in my seat like, Grandma, why are you laughing so much? But since that first Faded movie watching experience, it became like my family's favorite movie to watch with people. Because like when we'd have people over and we'd go to pick a movie to watch, inevitably they'd be like, oh, have you seen Secondhand Lions? And of course they hadn't, because nobody's seen it. And so my parents would be like, oh, you need to watch Secondhand Lions. And so I'm pretty sure at this point, it's my like most watched movie overall. I've probably seen it a Bob Book amount of times, like 15 to 20 times.
I love that story, man.
Yeah, dude.
I'm glad that you kind of admitted up front, too, that there is a huge sentimental attachment to this movie. Like, aside from, it just hitting you at the right age, like, that's a story that you share with your grandma forever. And that's a story that you share with your family forever. Like, that's the kind of movie watching experience that sticks with you and that matters. And I respect that, dude.
I was going to say, this is like my most memorable movie attending experience. Actually, my second most was seeing Godzilla when I lived in Philly, but that's a story for another day.
So let me preface the whole rest of the episode with this. Like, Brad, I know you're going to give this movie a 10 out of 10, and you probably know that I'm not going to give this movie a 10 out of 10. And I think in some ways, the scores we give this movie don't matter at all, because this is you sharing with me a part of yourself. This is what movies do best, right? And this is usually the kind of thing that I would say at the end of the episode to have some kind of nice sentimental thing to carry us off into the next week. But I want to say it here because this is what movies do for people. And at the end of the day, you like what you like. And I think in some ways, like if a movie just happens to hit you at the right time, you can't even help what you like sometimes. You know, the movie that you and your significant other saw on your very first date is a story that you're going to share forever, whether or not it was the greatest film you've ever seen. And I think
or whether or not you remember any of the movie.
Hey, there it is. And Brad, I think that you would probably admit, like, objectively speaking, this is not the greatest film ever made, and you're not arguing that it is, but it is a movie that holds a very special place in your heart. And I think that when you and I sit down to kind of like critically evaluate movies that mean a lot to either of us, you know, it kind of takes on a different tone, because at the end of the day, like, does it really matter what the flaws of this movie are? It's not going to change your score, and it's not going to take away from what the movie means to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a world where you give E.T. a 10, and that's just unacceptably poor taste in movies. But hey, go for it, man.
So I am coming into this episode having seen this movie, I think, one other time on Brad's recommendation. I think I watched this in college or maybe really early on in our grad school experience, Brad, because I'd always heard you kind of hype it up, and it happened to be on Netflix or something. And I said, yeah, I'll give it a whirl. So it's been a number of years since I've rewatched this. I am the Brad G of this equation today. I'm kind of going back into this movie, not remembering much about it. And I will say, Brad, that in true Brad G fashion, I took 0 notes on this movie because...
Yeah, there we go.
Because I knew that, like, if I took a bunch of notes, if I had these really minute, nitpicky things, like, it would just make this episode poor because none of that's going to affect what you think of the movie. And I think with episodes like this, it's more important to just kind of give our general impressions of the movie. And so, like, this is going to be, I think, a really loosey-goosey kind of episode for us today, Brad.
Bob, I love that you've spent the past 5 minutes basically trying to soften the blow that you don't think this is a good movie.
I did not say that.
You feels like you're hemming and hawing quite a bit, Bob. I think that, interestingly for me, I was kind of going on a IMDb spree of like rating movies that I know well enough I can rate without like watching them again recently. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I got to Secondhand Lions and I was like, you know, I'll be fair. I'll give it like a 9. I know that I love it more than other people. I'll probably watch it again someday and realize like, yeah, it's probably like an 8 to 8.5 movie that I give a 9. Bro, I'll tell you what, man, sitting down for this episode, I was genuinely blown away. Like, I haven't watched this movie since we started the podcast, so I do feel like I'm bringing a fresher set of eyes, you know, with all the cinematic knowledge I've gained over the last almost 3 years now. Holy cow. And I think this movie holds up, Bob.
All right, well, let's not delay it any longer. I think it's time for us to get into Brad Explains, the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the movie he has just seen, often for the first time. According to Brad, this was at least his 21st time seeing the movie. So this should be no issue for you, Brad. We're putting 60 seconds on the clock. Can you explain the plot of Secondhand Lions?
Secondhand Lions is about a young boy named Walter who is dropped off at his great uncle's house in Texas for the summer. He gets to hang out with them. He is young and shy and going through all the voice squeaks you can imagine. And it's essentially about him learning to become a man by hanging out with his great uncles, who supposedly are worth millions and millions of dollars. Throughout the film, he is offered different explanations as to how they came by their money. He's not even totally certain that they have all that money, but they're wealthy enough to buy a few things from traveling salesmen. And the movie hinges on this idea of what are the stories you believe about the world. And the stories that he learns from his uncles help shape him into the kind of person he wants to be.
Boom. That was 45 seconds. Nicely done.
Dude, nailed it, man.
So, Brad, I think as we get into this movie, I'm going to be comparing it to probably a number of other movies, as, you know, I tend to do here. But I think the very first thing I want to compare it to is based off what you said in Brad Explains, that in a lot of ways, this is a movie that becomes about like stories we tell and stories we choose to believe about each other. And I think in that way, that was probably the most touching theme of the movie for me. And it reminded me a lot of the conversation that we had around Life of Pi, which was that, you know, at the end of the day, there are two ways of looking at the world around us. Like either there's a God or there's not. And no amount of arguments, I think, are going to persuade someone beyond like, which story do you prefer when you look at the world around you? And I kind of really liked that this movie tipped into that direction, that like a major part of growing up is deciding what you believe about the world and sticking to that and making your principles consistent with that. I thought that was a really beautiful touch here.
Yeah, and actually, that was the element of the movie that you're talking about is it really culminates when Walter, who has been slowly learning the life of his uncle's, the story of his uncle's life through his one uncle, Garth, there's a point where Hub is telling Walter that it doesn't matter what a man believes as long as he believes in it and believes in it wholeheartedly. Like, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. And I remember for a long time when I was younger thinking that was like the unfortunate part of this movie. You know, like, I don't know, I was just young and I craved this sense of certainty and that you have to know something to be true in order to believe in it. But I think that there's an element in me as I grow older that I've actually come to appreciate that as one of the most important parts of the movie, that's almost the idea of what faith is for me, that there's a small element of any human being that can't know for certain that what they believe is ultimately true. And that is the fact that makes it so important that they believe in it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
The long speech I give the young man sounds like you need to hear a piece of it. Just a piece. Sometimes the things that may or may not be true are the things that a man needs to believe in the most. That people are basically good. That honor, courage, and virtue mean everything. That power and money and power mean nothing. That good always triumphs over evil. And I want you to remember this, that love true love never dies. You remember that, boy. You remember that.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I feel like, Brad, this episode just feels so inverted from what we normally do because we're diving real deep on this immediately. But I will say, as we kind of pull back, that was the element of the movie that I appreciated the most, but it was also kind of, in some ways, the element that I felt was most underserved. And I wish they had gone just a little further with it, a little bit deeper with it. And even at the end of the film, when they flash forward to Walter as a very grown adult, you kind of get a little glimpse of it with the very last lines of the movie. But I just wish there had been a little bit more of a callback to that idea of, you know, sticking to your guns, essentially. And like I said, living your life consistent with what you believe. So it was a really nice touch, but I think it's probably the first area where I would say, I wish the movie had gone just a little bit further. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of does. I mean, for me, I think the whole movie kind of hinges around that. And you see it played out in the different facets of the movie. I think you see that question answered by all the different characters. You see it answered by his mom, how the story that she chooses to believe about her life and the type of life that has led her to live. You see it in her boyfriend that she brings around near the end of the movie. You see it when Hub is fighting the young teenage boys at the gas station and the speech that he gives them. Like, you see all the characters declaring, this is who I am based on the things that I say and the actions that I take. And Walter sits back the entire movie and watches all these different people engage in all these different truths. And at the end of it, he gets his moment, his heroic moment to choose what he believes in. And that, like, so for me, I think that the whole movie revolves around that. If anything, the ending of the movie does, I'm with you a little bit that the ending, it kind of changes that a little bit with this whole idea of like, yep, they really lived.
Right.
Instead of giving you a, like, they knew who they were.
Yes. Yep.
I don't know.
Totally agree. So let's talk about the performances. I think we've run on a little long here about like deep themes of the movie. People want to know who's in this movie. And the 3 stars of this film are Haley Joel Osment, Robert Duvall, and Michael Caine. And man, oh man, are all 3 of them like unreasonably good in this movie. This is a children's movie that was not made for a lot of money. And if I'm being frank, it doesn't, like, it's not a very good looking movie. Like, it kind of looks like a TV movie. And I think some elements of it feel like they kind of cheaped out on it. But then it's almost like they knew, all right, well, if we nail the 3 leads, it's still going to be a good movie, like, no matter what else we do. And it's kind of like when you put Michael Caine up against a bunch of Muppets and in A Christmas Carol, and it becomes like maybe the best version of A Christmas Carol ever because it's Michael Caine. Brad, I mean, especially the veterans here, Duvall and Michael Caine, are just uniformly excellent.
Robert Duvall, this might be one of my favorite performances of all time. When I talk about a performer being sincere, this is the performance I'm talking about.
It's a perfect Duvall performance too. And like, he is one of our great, I don't want to say unsung actors because it's like people who know. You know, you see some of the more showy performers from that era, your Pacinos or your, Jack Nicholson's, even your De Niro's to some point. And I think guys like Hackman and Duvall kind of fly under the radar because they've always been just a little more understated in the performances that they choose. And Duvall especially. But man, oh man, I mean, he's great in everything. Like, I was just sharing the news with somebody today that Paramount's going to re-release The Godfather sometime here in February, and like in theaters. And I just started thinking about how great he is as Tom Hagen and how everyone's talking about Pacino and, James Caan and Marlon Brando. And it's like, yeah, but have you watched how good Robert Duvall is in that movie?
Bro, you literally took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say, like, think about Robert Duvall in The Godfather. Nobody talks about that performance, but it's probably up there as the top 2 or 3 performances in that movie. So, like, him in this movie, though, I think what I love about it is that and I could probably say this about Caine as well. Both of them, I feel like, could have just turned in for a paycheck. But I honestly feel like they treated this movie like a lot of younger stars do when they get their indie project greenlit. They took this so seriously, this idea of being a parental figure to a young boy who needs guidance. They bought in, and you can tell in their performance, the way they treat Haley Joel Osment. Like, he is their equal every single time he's on screen with them, and they get it. They recognize his role in the movie, and they just give such a sincere performance. When he has that kid by the throat, and he's giving them the speech of who he is.
Hey, who do you think you are, huh?
Just a dumb kid, huh? Don't kill him. Hub McCain. I fought in 2 world wars and countless smaller ones on 3 continents. I led thousands of men into battle with everything from horses and swords to artillery and tanks. I've seen the headwaters of the Nile and tribes of natives no white man had ever seen before. I've won and lost a dozen fortunes, killed many men, and loved only one woman with a passion a flea like you could never begin to understand. That's who I am.
Oh, just literal chills every single time I even think about it, let alone watch it.
All right, so let's talk about Michael Caine a little bit then on the flip side. And I don't know how to express that I think Michael Caine is great in this movie. And also that I think if they were going to replace one of the two, Michael Caine would be the one to go for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really risky to put Michael Caine in a movie like this where he's playing an American with a Southern accent, having the Michael Caine Cockney voice, because he goes through at least 5 different Southern dialects in this movie.
Yeah,
like he's in Tennessee, he's in the Panhandle, he's in Georgia, and then he's in Texas. And you're like, okay, like what go with one, buddy. And you know he's trying really hard, and God bless him for that. And I think his sheer acting ability makes up for a lot of it. But I do kind of wonder, like, all right, I wonder what other actors probably would have been available for this. And if they're at least 90% as good as Michael Caine, like, what does it do to the chemistry of this movie? You know what I mean?
Yeah, honestly, I think for me, it's so hard to imagine anyone else in that role, mostly because of the chemistry that he and Duvall have together. Like, I don't think there's a world in which I couldn't imagine those two as bickering old brothers who are just bachelors who are living out the rest of their life on a little old farm in Texas. And so his performance for me really hinges on the fact that he has such good chemistry with Duvall and with Osment that feels almost irreplaceable.
Mm-hmm. All right, so there's Michael Caine. We've done Robert Duvall. Let's do Haley Joel Osment. If we're comparing it to, like, The Sixth Sense, I think this performance is like 85% as good as that performance, which is saying a lot, right? Like, that's the best child performance I've ever seen. But I think it comes down to a couple things for me that are just like slight detractions. And first of all, I just don't think that the director of this film is a very competent director. And I think that'll come up in the second half. I'll get into some of the technical stuff. And also, like, I just don't think he's a great director of actors. And so I think, like, when it comes time for Haley Joel Osment to do some things that are a little bit out of his wheelhouse, like that very first scene where they drop him off and he's, it's played for laughs of, like, the pig coming up and smelling him and him not knowing what to do. Like, it's a little bit of physical comedy, and that's not something we've really seen from Haley Joel Osment. That scene played a little awkwardly for me. Like, it worked pretty well, but I think that, like, if you put that in the hands of, like, a Spielberg, it's obviously going to be 10 times better, right?
Yeah, I think in general, my main issue with McCandless as a director is that he just doesn't always know what to do with the camera.
No, not at all.
Like, there's so many moments where I'm like, he could have been served by just having one camera shot that slowly, like, panned around a scene rather than all of the different cutaways that he uses. And so if there's any, like, specific thing that I struggle with, it's that. And even that scene that you're talking about, when they drop him off, there could have been literally one beautiful shot, like, from the house where you see the two uncles, you see Haley Joel Osment, you see his mom driving away, and then the camera should slowly swoop from up down behind Haley Joel Osment, almost looking up at the house with his uncles walking away from him, and, like, see the house from Walter's point of view as this big, large, imposing, almost like haunted mansion.
Yeah.
And it would have been one shot.
Right.
But instead, you literally had about 6 different shots of the wheels on the car as it drove away, and then Walter's face, and then the uncles turning to leaving, and then back to Walter, and then back to the shot of, like, the house and the uncles and Walter. I'm like, you could have just done one shot. Dude, it would have been amazing.
Before we do anything else, I'm grinning from ear to ear right now. I'm so proud of you, Brad G. Like, you're out here, like, directing a movie in your mind.
That's right.
Like, saying this shot would have worked better if you had done it this way. And
yep.
Let's be honest here. Like, when we started this podcast 3 years ago, I don't know if you at that time would have paid as much attention to the way a movie was shot and edited. And now you're like, hey, I've seen enough Iñárritu movies that I know that this can be done in one shot. Like,
yep.
So I agree with you. And I think that I mentioned this before, but the look of this movie It looks
it's drab.
It's not only that it's drab. Yeah, I mean, like, it's drab, and it also it looks like a TV movie. Like the way that each shot is framed, it's like slightly too close, so that they're like almost like they're planning on it being, chopped down on the sides. It's called pan and scan for when they used to show movies on the old 4x3 TVs. It was almost like they intended to make this for television. And I think the director here his name is McCandless, you said?
Tim McCandless.
I think that he tips into some things that are like very emblematic of TV movies of the time, of like Lifetime movies. The very, very end of this movie, you have that line of like, yeah, they really lived. And they freeze frame it on the actor's like cheesy smiling face. And then he's like, that's not good enough. We have to remind you who we're talking about. And so he cuts back to another shot of dead Michael Caine, and then another shot of dead Robert Duvall, and then a final shot of them walking into the house. And this time around, it's all sepia toned, like they're in the beginning of The Wizard of Oz. And I'm like, buddy, like, we know who you're talking about. It's a good ending. You wrote a pretty good script here. Like, get out of your own way. And I think, like, this is a conversation we've had about Shyamalan, especially, of Shyamalan the writer versus the director. And sometimes it's like Shyamalan the director doesn't trust the writer enough, or vice versa. Yeah. I feel like if McCandless had just given this script off to whatever director was available at the time, we probably would have gotten a movie that at least visually looked a lot better and was probably edited together better as well. Because you're like, Brad, I have nothing bad to say. Like, there's a couple cheesy moments in this movie. I think there's a couple, like, really, we're going to do that now. But for the most part, this is a really tightly constructed script, and I think it's well written. But the directing is just really subpar.
You know who he could have handed it off to?
Oh, who's that?
His buddy Brad Bird, who directed the film that Tim McCandless also wrote.
The Iron Giant, yeah.
The Iron Giant.
He sure could have.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you, dude. There are a few moments in this movie that come across as cheesy. They work for me because I just think this movie is freaking hilarious. But I can understand there's a few times where it's super cheese. I get it. The biggest thing for me, though, with the humor in this movie is that it's just so easily believed in. Like, dude, the moment... One of the best jokes of the movie doesn't even have a single line attached to it. They're out there digging up their garden, and Hub and Garth are dipping, and Hub just reaches over and offers some dip to Walter. Mm-hmm. And he just starts hacking up a lung. And you just see Robert Duvall laughing, mm-hmm. and Garth is yelling at him, and he's clapping him on the back. It's just the humor throughout this movie. It's just emblematic of like good old people humor.
All right, before we go, go ahead.
I was saying the other line for me that genuinely is just the funniest stuff in the world is that moment, and this is a moment where I think it's actually well directed. You have this camera shot from the top of the stairs, and you see Walter with like an old timey candle peek around from the corner. And then he pulls back, and the camera shot changes, and you see Walter standing in front of Duvall and Caine. And they just go on this speech about, well, we're getting pretty old now. And his brother goes, yeah, we're kicking off to die any moment now, so if we die in the middle of the night, you're on your own. And the look of terror in his face as he goes up those stairs. It's priceless.
No, it's really good.
The humor in this movie just gets me every single time.
All right, Brad, I think we're at a good place to press pause here. There's a couple more performances I do want to talk about, particularly Kyra Sedgwick. And I also want to compare this to a couple other movies because I think you might like where I'm going with my comparisons here, but we'll save that for after the break. Let's drink this Angel's Envy. What do you say?
Let's get to it.
All right, today we are trying one of the more popular brands in American whiskey. This is Angel's Envy Bourbon. Angel's Envy is pretty famous around these parts, Brad, because it was really the first bourbon that, on like a big scale, that was finishing their stuff in old port casks. They took the principles of what you normally see in the Scotch world and started applying it to bourbon. This is the brainchild of a pretty legendary master distiller, Lincoln Henderson, and his son, Wes. We've heard about Lincoln Henderson on the show before. He was Peggy No Stevens' boss for a long time at Brown-Forman. He's pretty much responsible for Woodford Reserve. He's also responsible for releasing Gentleman Jack. So, like, the guy's a legend. And his son came up to him one day and said he wanted to work together, and they kind of hit on this idea of finishing bourbon. Now, it seems very, quaint to look at the last 5, 6, 7 years of the bourbon world and all of the crazy finishes we're getting now and think that, not that long ago, 10, 11 years ago when Angel's Envy launched, they were really the only name in the game doing this. So, they have a really special place in the heart of a lot of bourbon drinkers. But Brad, I'm interested to see if their flagship product really still holds up with some of these great finishes we've tried before.
Yeah, this is a bottle that I got from a good friend of mine for my birthday. Shout out to producer Eric from season 1, if anybody remembers. And for me, I've tried it a few times, and it's a wonderful gift because it's really hard to get. It flies off the shelves anytime it hits them. It's not my favorite whiskey. I'll just put it that way.
Brad, I don't know if I've ever tried just the standard Angel's Envy. They have some other finishes now. They do a barrel proof. Like, a lot of their higher end stuff is very, very good. But what we're dealing with today is just your standard Angel's Envy. It clocks in at 86.6 proof or 43.3% alcohol by volume. This is sourced whiskey that is then finished in these port casks. Brad, I'm excited to dive in here. Let's get to it, man. What are you picking up on the nose?
Bob, it has a pleasant nose. It's got a little bit of a caramely tinge to it. There's a tiny bit of grapiness to it that you would expect from a port finish. And I get a hint of oakiness on the back end of it. It's not incredibly complex, but it's a nice, pleasant nose. I think I'll give it a 7. I'll give it a 7 out of 10.
So this is sourced whiskey, and it comes from the name of the company that it comes from is Kentucky Bourbon Distillers, which is like a code name for Willett Distillery. And I think that, assuming they're using the same juice in Willett products that they're using in this has a lot of the Willett-ness to it. Like, it has a lot of that kind of...
Come on, Bob. Just say it.
Oh, you ready for it? It's got some funk.
Oh, man.
Actually, like, in this regard, because it's so watered down, I think, like, it just comes across a little more dusty. Like, there is that kind of, like, sawdustiness to this. But it kind of just smells like a standard bourbon. Like, if I took my Noah's Mill and I just watered it down a little bit. I don't know that I'm really getting any port influence here. So I like it, but it's just... I'm not picking up anything, like, extravagant here. So I'm going to give it a 7.5 on the nose. Yeah,
Bob, honestly, it kind of comes across a little bit leathery. Bro, are you all right over there?
Oh, man. No, go finish your thoughts. I'll be quiet.
I'll just restart that thought.
No, just go on. This is all staying in.
There's a bit of mustiness to it. I get like a tiny bit of, like, I don't know, almost like a strawberry jam note. There's some vanilla, I guess. I don't know, Bob. I'm struggling a little bit. Can you help me out?
No, I can't. So I'll say this. It's almost like it hits the middle of your palate and then it's like, nope. And it decides to do something very different. So, like, I took a sip and on the front of my palate, I'm like, all right, it's not very sweet, but it's got like a little bit of, I'm getting a little bit of an alcohol tingle. I think this might go in the direction of a Rowan's Creek or a Noah's Mill, which I both really like. And then I went to swallow it and it was like, there is no sweetness. There is no, like, dustiness. It is, it's just like, hey, would you like some Robitussin? And then it's just like, and it's not even like, I mean, it really tastes like NyQuil or Robitussin. Like, it has that kind of like fake grape flavor to it, but it's cough syrup for me. And like, I don't like this, Brad.
Yeah. I think it's a 5 for me on the palate. It's not horrific. It's still a decent whiskey, but like you said, the decentness kind of falls away really quickly on the finish. Mm-hmm. For me, the finish, like you said, it feels like I just took a sip of cough syrup.
Yeah.
And that's the flavor that's sitting on my palate. So for me, it's a 5 out of 10 on the palate, but a 3 out of 10 on the finish.
Yeah, I'm going to give it I'll give it a 5 on the palate, just being generous because it's a birthday gift for you. And I'll give it a 4.5 on the finish. Like the actual, the feeling in your chest and kind of like going down, the gullet is not that bad. But it's that lasting flavor of cough syrup that's just not doing it for me. When it comes to balance, I don't know that I can score this very high on balance either, because the nose really promised a very different experience than what was delivered here. Actually, I think this drink's a lot spicier than the 86 proof that it is. I would have thought this was about, 95 to 100 proof. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I expected it to be a little bit more well-rounded, maybe taste a little bit more mature than it. I mean, it doesn't taste young, but it also doesn't taste like that kind of dustiness that you get from some of Willett's stuff. I guess I'll give it a 6 on the balance, Brad.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me on the balance, it's a decently balanced whiskey. You definitely get those jam notes throughout the entire experience, which is really nice. I'll give it a 6. I'll give it a 6 on balance.
All right, Brad, if you wanted to pick up a bottle of this in the state of Ohio, how much would it set you back?
That would be $49.99.
Okay,
and
so it's
right now looking at it, sold out, not available, in stock, sold out.
Yeah, it's
sold
allocated
out.
here. It's hard to come by.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we kind of have to evaluate this the way we would a lot of Buffalo Trace products. This costs as much in the state of Ohio as a bottle of Weller Antique. And I'm not directly comparing the two because that's a no-brainer. But in the same way, it's like, okay, it costs you $50 and you probably have to wait a few weeks until somebody gets a shipment of it, and you probably have to drive to a liquor store that you didn't initially intend to go to. So it's like $50 plus extra hoops. I don't think $50 is necessarily like an outrageous price for this, because it's kind of in that like Basil Hayden's vein of a lower proof whiskey that is positioning itself as being higher end. I wouldn't spend $50 on this. I certainly wouldn't like have to wait on pins and needles for it to come in. I'm just going to give it I'll give it a 4.5 on value, Brad.
Yeah, I'll give it a flat 5. It's not a terrible value. I don't want to say it's the worst finished whiskey we've ever had, but it's definitely far and away not the best. But $50 is not breaking the bank. It's not wildly expensive for a finished whiskey. So yeah, I'll stick in the middle and give it a 5.
I'm coming out to a 27.5 out of 50, Brad. This is not cracking that upper echelon for me. Where are you at?
26.
26. All right, so we're at a 53.5 out of 100, or a 26.75 out of 50. I am not going to recommend buying, and I'm also not going to recommend trying. I mean, if somebody has a bottle, like, great, but I don't think you need to buy this at the bar.
Yeah. Yeah, this does feel... Man, Bob, we're getting snooty. I just realized that.
No, we're not. I mean, there's so many cheap whiskey. Like, Wild Turkey Rare Breed cost less than this.
Yeah. No, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know how to say this nicely. If somebody is super duper crazy pumped about Angel's Envy, it probably means that they're not paying close attention to the whiskey world right now, which is okay. Like nobody has to. Drink what you want to drink. I don't give a rip. If you like Angel's Envy, then awesome. But if somebody offers it to you and they're really excited about it, just smile and thank them and go, man, thank you so much for sharing your whiskey with me.
Thank you so much for sharing your Secondhand Lions with me. I totally get it.
All right, bro. We're about to throw
I'm just
the
with
heck
you, dude.
down.
No, I'm just messing with you. No, I'm with you, man. Like, if this is somebody's favorite whiskey, like, there's a reason for it. And you're right, Brad. It probably is somebody that's kind of just getting started out in the world of whiskeys, and they're branching out into finished whiskeys. That's fantastic. But I do think if you dig a little deeper, there's a lot better out there, and you could probably get it at a similar price, if not a little cheaper.
But that's how we feel about it. Honestly, if you feel differently, let us know. Head over to our Instagram pages. Tell us how wrong we are. Until we hear from you, though, we need to get back into talking about one of the greatest movies ever created by humanity. Secondhand Lions. Bob, what do you say?
Let's get to it. All right, that was Angel's Envy, a whiskey that we are decidedly not impressed with.
No bueno.
Not so much. But Brad, it's redeemed by this movie, which I like a lot. I need you to know that I actually enjoyed myself watching this movie.
I'm really glad to hear that, Bob.
And I
want
say
you to go
that
into I want you to go into extreme detail as to why you like this movie.
I will before my final score, but before I get there, I use that as a preface to talk about Kyra Sedgwick, who is just hamming it up, man, and in a way that's like, my God, why did no one restrain her from doing this? Like, she's not good, Brad. She's not good in this movie. And I need to know your thoughts on her in this movie.
I think that she works better as a plot device than the actual performance that was given. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm with you, dude. If there is a problem with this movie in general, it's that it goes way over the top on a lot of different fronts, right? It's like way cheesy at points. It's way emotional and heartfelt at points. And it's way over the top with her performance of just an uncaring mother. I think it leads to some incredibly important moments of the movie, though. And so I feel like I'm able to forgive some of her performance for the fact that it leads to so many development points for Walter. Like that first time that he admits out loud to his uncles, like, yeah, like my mom lied to me, like she always does. And then there's just something beautiful about that moment when Duvall just says, well, shoot, kid, we're sorry you have a lousy damn mother.
Right.
Like, there's something so honoring about that moment that, for me, it's moments like that make me go, you know what? Like, we need a ridiculous, over-the-top, just terrible mother. Mm-hmm. In order to fit that emotional moment.
Yeah, I agree. I still think that the character could have been played in a way that came across a little more believable by a different actress. But I'm with you. Like, I don't have a problem with the character being as like fake and over the top as she is. I think part of it's just that like Kyra Sedgwick is a really good TV actress. She had that show The Closer for a long time, which is good. It's fine. It's a good show. But like, you know what I mean? Like there's a level of difference there. And
I was going to say, I think one of the reasons this comes across as a TV movie is because pretty much all of the actors and actresses outside of Caine, Duvall, and Osment are made for TV kind of actors. Mm-hmm. And I say that with all the love in the world. I'm going to give a quick shout out. So there's a online Dungeons and Dragons podcast called Critical Role. And one of the persons who plays in that is a guy named Travis Willingham. Well, early in his career, he tried some on-screen acting, and he landed a role as one of the 4 thugs in Secondhand Lions. and I've now watched hundreds of hours of this dude playing D&D, and he's one of my favorite characters on the show. And I was literally scrolling through the cast for this movie and saw Travis Willingham's name come up, and I was like, what? I don't think my mind had ever been as blown. And like I said, got nothing but love for the guy, but I think he would even admit he's not necessarily a movie actor.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people in this film who don't have a big name that not exactly built for the big screen. I especially think about the funny thing for me is I don't think of Kyra Sedgwick's performance as over the top, partially just because of her boyfriend, Stan, played by a guy named Nicky Cat.
Heck yes, dude. Who a TV actor. He was on a show I watched back in the early 2000s called Boston Public. He was my favorite person on that show. So he came up and I was like, Nicky Cat, of course.
Yeah, and he is wildly over the top.
Yeah.
He is hitting a 12-year-old. It's intense. So I don't know. The ridiculousness of his performance almost just dulls the craziness of Kyra Sedgwick.
So with all that said, though, I kind of want to segue into final scores here. And there's 2 movies that I still feel like I want to compare this one to. The first one is a movie that we're going to be watching in the next, I assume, few weeks here. It's called Elizabethtown. It's a movie by Cameron Crowe, the guy that did Almost Famous. And in a lot of ways, it has like the opposite problem of this movie, where I feel like this movie has a really solid script and really poor direction. Elizabethtown is a very competently made movie where the script is just trying to do way too many things at once. And if you tighten that up a little bit, I feel like there's a great movie in it. And I kind of feel the same way here. Like Secondhand Lions has a legitimately great coming of age film inside of it. And I feel like the actors and the script are working as hard as they possibly can to overcome the deficiencies of like the camera work, the editing, and the direction. And still, I look at this movie, Brad, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm really charmed by it. And it reminds me of a movie I saw when I was 10 years old called My Dog Skip. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It is so eerily similar to this movie in that it's about a boy coming of age in the 1950s who is awkward and, he's picked on. And in that movie, it's the fact that he gets this childhood dog that goes with him through his whole coming of age process.
Yeah, I've seen that movie.
Yeah. And it's bookended with him as a grown up, like finding out that his dog died. And that's like, dude, oh my gosh, I have never cried harder at a movie than I cry at My Dog Skip. But that movie too is like, it's not the best directed movie. It kind of looks like a TV movie. It's really corny. It's really cheesy. There's a lot of things in the script that are like, that would never happen in real life. And it's the same as this. And yet, like, there's a reason I didn't put My Dog Skip on my list for this time around. Because I'm like, I am not ready to go back and watch that movie and like ding it for not being great. Because to 10-year-old me, like that movie was emotionally devastating and also like it meant a lot to me. And so that's why it's hard to like objectively rate movies like this, Brad. I think objectively speaking, this is like a 6.5 to a 7, like quality wise in terms of the direction and what you see on the screen. In terms of what it could be, this could be like a 9 out of 10. And I enjoyed it a whole heck of a lot. So I think I'll give it a 7.5, Brad. I'm going to split the difference here, but that's a 7.5 that I think comes with a huge caveat. It's not like, like I'm crapping on this movie. It's just that I recognize both the limitations of it, and also I recognize how this can be your favorite movie. So I hope that score is acceptable to you.
Yeah, no, I get it. I've come to terms with the fact that this is objectively not a great movie. I totally understand that. I think what I hope people hear from me in reviewing, like I said, probably a top 3 movie for me. I hope that they hear and understand that if you're willing to accept the flaws for what they are, if you're willing to believe in the world that McCandless is trying to create, I think you'll find genuinely 3 phenomenal performances from the leads. You'll find a story that's worth believing in. And you'll find an opportunity to have a lot more feels than you thought you would feel. I think it's really summed up. I don't remember exactly. I think this might have been the Detroit newspaper that the review was written. But I really think the best way to sum up this movie is from this review I read. And it said this: most family films aim too low, so perhaps there should be a hearty applause for one that tries to do too much good in its small space of time. And like, I read that and I was like, yes, that person understands this movie. Like, I'm with you, dude. Feels like it was made for TV. Feels like if they had a good director and a good cinematographer at the helm, that this movie could have been an all-time great. But as it is, if you're willing to sit with some of the flaws in this film and set them to the side and pay attention to the story, pay attention to the small moments. Like when Walter is sitting with them at the gas station and he's thinking about running away, and he has that little moment of saying like, I've been in the group homes before. I'm not going back. Like, it's moments like that that just get me every single time I come back to this film. The laughs are just out of this world. There's so much I love about this movie. I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 with the caveat of like, I get it, dude. If I hadn't watched this movie growing up, I would probably watch it and give it like a 7.5, maybe an 8. But it's a 10 out of 10 for me.
All right, so we're coming out to an 8.75 out of 10. We would love to know what you think. Have you seen Secondhand Lions? If so, does it have a special place in your heart like it does with Brad? You can find us to tell us all about it on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @FilmWhiskey.
Or you can join the conversation with us directly. Jump onto our Discord. We have daily conversation with our fans over there. I just said the word fans. That sounds weird. We're just normal people. But we have people who like to talk to us about movies and whiskey on our Discord. You can find the link to it at the end of every single set of our show notes.
Brad, I have the rest of my movies already ready to go in this wheel randomizer here. I'm going to spin the wheel, but as always, I need you to make some wheel spinning sounds for me.
I'm just going to sing the song from Secondhand Lions. Do 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 dun 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 dun. Shum bum 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 bum. Shum bum 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 bum.
Oh man, I'm excited for this one. Another movie, Brad, if I'm being frank, that is like not a 10 out of 10, but hits me in the warm fuzzies the way that this movie does. It is
right in the gonads.
Just square in the nards. All right. It's Ben Stiller's 2013 film, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I'm really excited for that one, man. I'm smiling already. I can't wait. Have you seen it before?
I think I watched it once, maybe at your house.
Interesting.
I feel like the time when you guys were out of town, but Haley and I were staying at your place.
Just
I
rated
remember
my
watching. No, because we were staying down there. Or no, I figured it out. It's when we were down visiting and we were staying with y'all for a few days, checking out the seminary. You guys were both out, and we watched Inception one day, and I think we watched The Secret Life of Walter Mitty the other day.
Well, you're going to watch it again.
I led you to watching Secondhand Lions, and you led me to watching Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
All right, man. We're going to be back next Monday with that one, but until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.